All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our weekly COVID-19 webinar. My name is Elise Traub, and I am the Senior Director of Legislation and Advocacy for Best Friends Animal Society. So glad that you are joining us tonight. And before I get started and introduce our panelists, I just wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping items. You're all automatically muted for the presentation portion of this, so you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. If you have a question at any point, you can put it right into the chat box on your screen. We may pause during the presentation to answer some of those questions, but we have reserved a good chunk of time at the end for scheduled questions, so feel free to put your questions in the chat at any point. I do want to note that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available after we wrap up tonight. We are going to have some polls during the webinar to get some information from all of you. And after our Q&A at the end, we will be putting a short survey out to you to gather feedback about this webinar and also to get some information about what kind of upcoming webinars would be relevant to you and what you're interested in hearing about. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our panelists tonight. We're just starting something new this week where Dr. Erin Katribe, who is Best Friends' medical director, is going to join this webinar every week at the beginning to provide a short update on the CDC and AVMA changes to COVID veterinary guidelines. I think we all know those are changing quickly, so we're really thankful to have Dr. Erin give us the latest every week on those. And our other panelists tonight are Stacy Rogers, who's Best Friends' Midwest Regional Director, Kenny Lamberti, who's our Director of Grassroots Advocacy at Best Friends, April Muller, who is Best Friends' Digital Advocacy lead, and she's also a longtime volunteer for one of Best Friends' network partners in Chicago, the Rescue One Tail at a Time. And then last but not least, we have Sarah Aguilar, who is the Deputy Director of Pima Animal Care. So welcome to all our panelists. We are thrilled to have you here tonight. And I want to start off by turning things over to Dr. Erin for her update.
All right, happy to be here to provide that current information. Just like we said, we all know it can change really rapidly. So this week, however, we didn't see any changes. There was obviously the development of the infection confirmed in one of the tigers in the Bronx Zoo. And so I think that brought a lot of the pre-existing stuff to the surface. But bottom line, CDC still continues to say that we have no evidence that pets can transmit this disease to humans and that pets are not involved in the epidemiological spread of this disease. By far, humans are the greatest risk to other humans in this. Because we do have these isolated instances, though, of what we think is humans giving it to animals and those animals becoming infected, the CDC has made some recommendations for shelters just out of an abundance of caution. I really just want to reiterate, though, that we have these isolated cases. It's like I can count on my two hands the number of cases globally of animals getting infected through natural infections compared to obviously the huge numbers of human cases globally. Because of that, though, because we are concerned that there might be that risk, we think that infection is rare, but they have made some recommendations for how shelters should handle these animals if we do end up taking animals from COVID-positive homes. Ultimately, the first recommendation is that shelters shouldn't be the place that those animals go at all. And if we can, the CDC says this, we want those animals to go with friends or family members. That's the best place for them. If they do end up in one of our shelters, though, we are supposed to hold them for 14 days. And that's based on human data, right? So it's similar to how we would isolate ourselves if we had a known exposure. They are allowed human contact in that situation, but with some precautions. And I do want to call out, right? So having to hold them for that period of time before we can adopt them or send them to foster is I think, pretty challenging. And I know there's lots of shelters out there that are a little bit worried about it. These are really conservative recommendations, and they're just that, they're recommendations. We all have to decide what's right for our shelter. And even more importantly, even in hotbed areas like Seattle and New York, we're simply not seeing large numbers of animals from COVID positive homes going into shelters. The last number I heard from New York was only about 10, right? So, you know, I think this is something that it's important to think about and plan just in case, but definitely not something that I think we should be panicking about. Because of this too, there's some interesting work in New York right now that's actually looking at sheltering cats in place in those homes. And so this is, like I said, it's relatively new, so stay tuned for more of that as it evolves. And really the biggest thing that we wanna talk about and talk with our communities about is for them to make a plan for their pets. We all know here, right? Like the place for pets is not in the shelter, and certainly not during this crisis. So make a plan for your pets in the event that you can't care for them. Make a backup and make a backup for the backup for your own pets, and message the same to your communities as well. I think this is another great place where, you know, when we've reached out to our communities about things like emergency foster, they've really stepped it up. And so I think this is absolutely another place that we can engage them to do the same. So, yeah, that's, like I said, nothing super new this week. And we might have some new upcoming stuff next week on sheltering in place with those cats. But that's what I have this week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erin. Appreciate the update. And that was actually a perfect segue to our core topic tonight, which is neighbor to neighbor and how shelters can use their communities to support their COVID response. So I am going to start out with Stacy Rogers, who again is our Midwest Regional Director at Best Friends. And Stacy, I know your team has created a guide for shelters on a lot of things related to how they can lean on their community for support. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how shelters can use their community to get foster pets adopted or to help pets in the community that may need to be rehomed.
Yeah, definitely. So what we've really saw so far is that shelters are really exponentially increasing the number of adoptions they're doing, the number of foster parents they have. And so they're really relying on their community. And we want groups and rescues and shelters to continue building on that and really building that trust with their community and with their supporters so that they can keep animals out of the shelter system, both those that are already in it through your foster homes and those that might potentially be coming into it. So first, you fostered out lots of animals, probably more than what you've ever had. So we want you to really embrace those fosters as adoption counselors and help train them so that they can rely on their own network and work neighbor to neighbor to try to place those pets before they come back. Because what you don't want to happen is to create a bottleneck as animals are coming back post-COVID. You want to get them out of the system now. You can look at great examples like Jacksonville Humane Society had an awesome foster care bingo to help people really look at their own network and see if they've really exhausted all of their leads on placing their foster pets. And then also right now, as groups are only really doing essential intake, we know there's going to be those animals in the community that people are needing to surrender. So you can look to your community first to trust them and really finding a place on their own. Yeah, helping them by providing the resources like Adopt a Pet or information on your website on how to responsibly rehome a pet, but also having information out there about the other resources available just in case it's more a resource issue for rehoming than anything else, where you can get them the food or supplies they might need. And then just as you go through this with relying on your community, the key part is really just to keep communicating and making sure that you're sharing what you need, how they can help, and really communicating out all that information they need to be successful with placing those pets in a neighbor to neighbor way, rather than relying on you at the shelter who are probably stretched really thin at this time.
Thank you, Stacy. And it's a great point that we know in a lot of places that shelters have seen their community step up in ways they may have not seen before and on unprecedented levels. So I want to turn things over to Kenny right now, because as Director of Grassroots Advocacy, even before the COVID crisis hit, you've been thinking a lot about communities and how everyday people can help shelters right where they live. So can you tell us a little bit about the action team generally, and then how we've pivoted recently and how shelters can use the action team for support during the COVID crisis?
Yeah, sure. So I think, the action team, with a kind of quick overview, is a community-driven, everyday citizen resource that we want to both kind of act as, of course, a resource to its local shelters, but also be something that the community can kind of build and foster on its own. So in many ways, to relieve the burden that shelters, even in non-COVID-19 times, are stretched thin. And I think the public response, especially with fostering and adoption, has been really inspiring and amazing. And these are many of these people are people that weren't part of many of your kind of volunteer bases already, right? So that's what the action team, the spirit of the action team is to be community driven, for it to be to work towards it being self-sustaining, to be a positive resource to shelters, but also to work in its community, so the pets have the support they need in the community, so they don't end up in the shelters in the first place. And in just 6 months, we've built that to 11,000 members. I think we're in all 50 states. If not, we're in 45 plus. And these are all people, or majority people, who weren't part of any kind of or many existing animal welfare networks before. And I think as it relates specifically now during this kind of new normal, quote unquote, is I really think there's tremendous value in reaching out to those non-traditional partners. We have so many people at home, millions of people out of work, people dealing with different things in the home that they haven't dealt with before. And things like, people are connecting with their school systems virtually online. People are trying to stay connected with their churches, their YMCAs, their Boys and Girls Clubs, even things like CrossFit. They're building community virtually. And I think it's a brilliant and amazing opportunity to tap into those communities, to touch back to the animal shelter and to address some of these needs, not just the foster and the adoption needs. I think there's so many things. We've created some great resources that you can find at bestfriends.org/action team. I'm sure some of the links are being shared here in the follow-up. And we have a toolkit. We have the ability to join the action team, to find local action team members. And again, the spirit of this is kind of, we created these kindness cards, with just a simple card to help connect people. A document that is how to create a neighborhood pod, which is a way to build your neighborhood network of people, a way to identify people that may be more vulnerable, more at risk, and to find out what the needs are, and to find out what's working, share stories, share inspiration, and support each other at that true neighbor-to-neighbor level. And it was something we were doing really successfully and excited about prior to COVID-19. And obviously now we're pivoting it to work more virtually, to work more digitally. And I think, like I said, it's a great opportunity to tap in to these networks of really great people who maybe we haven't kind of plugged into the movement before. Because, and I'll finish with this, I think we're all a little bit, I don't want to say worried, at least minimally concerned that in 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, whenever we do get back to the world, we know there's going to be an additional need. So if we can expand that network of volunteers and kind of people we have in our community and double it and triple it, in case of some of those pets and foster do come back, you'll have a bigger kind of local army to support you in your efforts. And so it's the true essence of grassroots, neighbor to neighbor. I think it's important all the time, and in times of crisis, it's even more important. And so again, bestfriends.org/action team. You can learn more about it. And again, it's really in the spirit of expanding your network, expanding your army, and bringing more people who maybe haven't been in the fold before into the fold as a resource for you in your local community.
Thanks, Kenny. And I think that's one way we've heard from a lot of shelters that have volunteers that normally come in person and do work in, physical work in the actual shelter, and they can't necessarily use those volunteers in the same way. So this kind of action team concept is a way that shelters can think about using some of their volunteers who they want to keep engaged in this time. And I want to turn things over to April, who does a lot of the digital advocacy work for Best Friends, and particularly for our action team, and through her work in the rescue world, really knows a lot about engaging audiences digitally. So April, we know a lot of people are stuck at home right now. Some of them have more time and attention than they did in a pre-COVID world. But on the other hand, we also know all of us have been invited to a lot of webinars. There's a lot of email coming through. There's a lot of noise out there on digital channels that's competing for people's attention. So can you give some advice to how a shelter can break through that noise and really engage their audience?
Sure, thanks, Elise. So the first thing, and it's on the screen, people are looking for connection and comfort right now more than ever. And that's because we're all stuck inside. We don't have the in-person events and abilities that we once had. So all of that connection is happening online. More than ever now is a good time to try some digital tools and some digital channels that your shelter or rescue group hasn't really ventured on before, because that's where all the conversations are happening and that's where the connection is happening. But one thing that I've learned, especially from managing Twitter for one tail at a time, is that people don't want to be marketed to. They don't want to feel like you're trying to sell at them, especially at a time of crisis. So it's really important to be personable, direct, and authentic on your social media channels and talk to people, like a human, and not, be using too many hashtags and too many heavy graphics and URLs. Right now, people want to feel connected, and the best way to do that is to just talk to them, on their level. One of the other ways that I see people having success is to emphasize the human impact that your organization is making, because right now there's a lot more going on outside of the animal world, and we need to show that we are part of the community and part of the ecosystem that we're trying to support. So you want to show that by helping animals, you're also helping people. And what I've seen is that those are the stories that are getting picked up and getting organizations more coverage and media hits that can help you grow your network. That's really important, like Kenny said, to expand the network and expand the movement so that we have more supporters, more people to volunteer, more people to foster, and eventually more people to adopt. So you want to look at ways to grow your network, not just be talking to people who already follow you. Look for people having conversations about fostering. Look for people having conversations about wanting to have a pet during their quarantine, and engage with them where they're at, not just where you are. And then one of the other bullet points, encouraging support for your community. What I mean by this is, don't just talk about yourself. You can also be talking about other parts of your community that you're involved with and that you want to show support for. That expands your network outside of just animal people. And also, like Kenny said, leveraging your volunteers and fosters, actually, like Stacy said, is really important right now, because they can also spread your message through their own social media. It's not just about what you're posting, it's about how you're empowering your community to spread the word about the animals in your care, so that you are reaching more people than just the people that are fostering. And finally, sharing and celebrating success. That's really, really successful right now, is to show the good stories, show the stories of people coming through and all your adoption applications. There was a segment on Seth Meyers the other night called "The Kind of Story We Need Right Now." And that's what it reminded me of, is all the people that want to see these positive impacts that are coming through for animal shelters.
Thank you, April. There's a lot of great tips in there that I think we can all take away with your wisdom in this kind of communication. It looks like we have a poll that's popped up about what kind of social media channels your organization uses. So if everyone could take a moment to check all of those that apply. And I appreciate your thoughts, April, and I think there's really a theme emerging here about engaging with different groups and not just talking to the same people we always talk to, like the animal welfare groups, but thinking about other people in our community and other groups in our community that may touch animals, but that we may not always be talking to. So Best Friends is part of our action team. We're looking to expand those conversations to groups like public health groups and domestic violence shelters and boys and girls clubs and these other community institutions that we may not always talk to as animal welfare groups, but are interacting with people who have pets and who may need some of the resources. So we really encourage you to look outside of just the animal audience that you already have, but finding new people to start conversations with. And I want to turn things over to Sarah Aguilar now. Again, she's with Pima Animal Care, and she can give us I'd love to hear the shelter perspective. How are you at Pima, Sarah, leaning on your community right now? We'd love to hear what you're doing.
Thanks. So I think animal shelters across the nation have been so intertwined with their communities historically, and we need them now more than ever. And our communities are showing up consistently. They're showing up in ways we never expected. And what we're asking for folks to do to help us is primarily to help us find owners of pets. The majority of pets that are coming into the shelter are strays. They have owners, they have caretakers, they have families that love them. And there's studies happening that indicate that the majority of pets are found within 1,000 feet of their home. And it's crazy. And it's an overwhelming majority, something like 80%. And we're learning that when pets stay in their neighborhoods, when they stay where they're found, that they go home much quicker. The return to owner rate is way higher than the shelter. And so we're asking people who find stray pets to help us find the owners by housing pets, walking around their neighborhood, putting up flyers, posting on Nextdoor, posting on their local social media groups, and getting pets back home. Secondly, we're asking folks to help us house pets safely. So pets, not just in the shelter, but to house pets in their homes through fostering, through adoption, and help provide a better environment for pets to live in. One of the things we talk about a lot is in 1909, when Teddy Roosevelt made this statement that kids without parents should be housed in foster homes and not orphanages, and we're sort of having that same resurgence for pets right now, that they do so much better in homes. So we're asking folks to step up through foster adoption and helping us return strays home. The third thing is help us stay safely, stay healthy. That animal shelters have been deemed essential, that animals still need to come in, they still need care, and by just following the recommended guidelines for distancing, masks, and hand washing and sanitizing, all of those things will help us stay healthy in order to keep providing these services. And lastly, help us spread the message, keep amplifying the need that animal shelters need communities, that people should be adopting, that folks should be fostering, just through interacting on social media, talking to your friends, just keep that wave going.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to turn things over now to Stacy, and I think there's a really important piece that Dr. Aaron mentioned at the beginning that would be great to dig into, and that is people having a plan for their pets in the event that they have to go into the hospital or have some other emergency that prevents them from caring for their pets. And so Stacy, can you talk a little bit about how you recommend that shelters help their community prepare?
Sure. And we're actually going to start out with a poll, which should be popping up at some point, just to see how many of you are already communicating about an emergency preparedness plan to your supporters, because it's something that is really important that you start communicating as early as possible and as frequently as possible, because it's not only going to help your supporters, it's going to help you when those animals that might have ended up at the shelter, if their people didn't have a plan, are going to be able to stay out in their homes with a caregiver, with somebody they're familiar with. And it's going to give all of those pets out in the community a really solid plan. So our Best Friends Network team put together a fantastic toolkit that has all of the information you need into the system about how to have your food prepared, what you need to think about, how many caregivers you should have as a first line of defense and a second backup and a third backup. And then as you get that information out there, you also need to recognize that some of the people in your community who need this information most may not be seeing your social media posts. So you want to think about how you can really spread that word. Similar to what Kenny was talking about with the action team, you want to really get it out into the communities and start making sure that everyone you need to reach has access to that. Our toolkit's available to download in English and Spanish, so you can have both options depending on your local population. And just keep communicating that information so that you make sure it's out in regular media, it's out in your social media, and it's getting out to your communities, because it's going to make a huge difference on keeping pets in their homes with their people. And even in the long term, it's going to help because it's going to give people that emergency plan, regardless if it's a COVID-19 emergency or just a general emergency for that family. It's going to have them already thinking about what they need to have in place to make sure that their pet is just as safe as they are.
Thank you, Stacy. And I think you brought up a good point about wanting to get that information out to the community. And I'm going to turn this over to April, because we know right now that brick and mortar shelters don't have the same number of people walking through their doors that they normally do. So April, can you talk a little bit about how shelters can continue to communicate with their donors, volunteers, potential adopters using digital tools, and maybe give us some examples of creative ways that shelters are engaging people?
Sure. First off, I think it's important to remember everyone's had to cancel a lot of in-person events and fundraisers, but most organizations and rescue groups have built a community over time that is depending on them for social connection and relationships, and we don't want to just drop that now that we can't do those in-person events. So I've been really impressed with a lot of the rescue groups adapting their events to virtual when possible, using Zoom, using WebEx, or Facebook Live. One example, Mutts of the Midway, they had a monthly event called Pups and Pints that they would do over Chicago at different bars and breweries. And instead of just canceling it and postponing it until we can all go outside again, they started doing it on Facebook Live with a different theme each week. And I think last week it was remote bingo. One Tail at a Time also did that. And it was attended mostly by volunteers and fosters, maybe not as many people from outside, but it was a really great way to keep their community engaged and involved, and nurture support that's going to be sustainable after this is over. So one of the other ways you can do that is, again, being personable and authentic, like I said in the previous slide, but also transparent, because those updates and giving people information that they need to know what's going on builds that sustainable trust that will last after the crisis and keep those people involved, especially considering that right now a lot of rescues are getting huge surges in foster applications. These are people that are maybe brand new to this work, maybe brand new to rescue, and you want to keep them involved over the long haul. So along those lines, making your foster and adoption process very clear and accessible online is very helpful, and reiterate it often, because you don't want to spend time answering questions and going over protocols. If they're online, if they're easily accessible, you can just send them to people and get them onboarded quicker. And like was mentioned before, engaging and activating the fosters and turning them into adoption counselors also translates to turning them into digital ambassadors. You can really empower them to help spread the word about adoptable dogs. One of the things that One Tail have done is, instead of taking pictures on our infamous adoption couch, because we can't do that right now, they created a digital frame that people can put around their adoption photos. And so now we have adopters helping amplify the message and spread the word, because they have this really easy digital way to show people that they adopted the dog and they are proud of that. Lastly, I just wanted to mention being creative. Things that may not have worked in the past have a better chance of working now. There's actually recent research showing that people are less using apps and mobile right now. They're more on desktop because they're home. So Facebook Lives in the evening, that may not have worked in the past, but right now people don't have anything else to do. So it's worth a shot to keep everyone engaged. And then Nextdoor.com, which I think Stacy mentioned, has had a 73.3% surge in traffic since stay-at-home orders went into place. So that's another channel that you may not have tried in the past, but now a lot of people are there, and that's a really good place to find new advocates.
Thanks, April. And that's a great point, to think about trying things that may not have worked in the past. And along those lines, I wanted to turn things over to Kenny to speak to what you think this means for the future, knowing that a lot of shelters are operating with limited staff and limited program, and we're seeing the community stepping up to fill that void. How do you think that this will change how shelters operate, and what do you think those needs are going to be down the line in the future?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, interestingly enough, I think we've talked a lot about the ways people are stepping up already. So I think this is a great time to be innovative and creative. And I think it's not just about individuals. I think it's also looking at connecting with entities. I think in different parts of the country, particularly in parts of the Northeast where intake has maybe been down for a while, shelters are trying to find creative ways to still be a resource to their community. So I think as we move into the future, in some places it's already happening, and is thinking of us as an institution as more kind of getting at the source of the issue, and kind of owner surrender programs, programs that get resources to people in communities that maybe we haven't had the strongest connection with. And I think also trusting, looking in the mirror and trusting kind of a more diverse and inclusive audience. And no matter where we are in the country, I live in New Orleans. I'm originally from Boston, and there's whole communities full of people here that don't have any connection to their local shelter. But they still have a high percentage of owning cats and dogs. So where are they acquiring these pets from? Can we be a resource to those communities in a more kind of significant, profound way than maybe we have been up to now, right? Can we tap into, people have mentioned things like, public health and different kind of other social institutions, schools and things like that, where they're sharing our information. Social workers in schools carry kind of laminated resource cards that talk about maybe it's food banks and homeless shelters or after school programs. Can we look to be creative and get our information on as part of those resources? Can we share when we do kind of webinars and we promote things virtually and when we're on local television? Can we find ways to tap into new audiences? I think what's really, really important, and I think this is a tremendous opportunity to change now, out of necessity. We're all been forced at the kind of drop of a dime to change out of kind of an emergency and necessity today. But I think it's important to guard against not kind of the pendulum swinging back and reverting back to maybe our comfort zone when we do get back to a bit more of normal kind of practices out there, and to think what worked today and how can we sustain that moving forward. And I believe strongly that the way to sustain and scale any of our efforts is to have the community be our partners in this work, not just recipients of service, not just where do we need to expand spay neuter services, not just where do we need to do more return to field services or kind of resource services, but how do we kind of use the community as our partner in this effort truly? How do we get them, like Sarah said really well earlier, to amplify our message of adoption, of kind of spay neuter, of things like that, and especially in those pockets of communities which we haven't hit yet? Because I know, having worked across the country for many years, even in places where intake is low and maybe we're at kind of those really lofty, impressive save rates in the 90s, there are still communities that are untouched. There are still communities where there's tremendous need. And I think it's thinking about how do we touch those communities? What entities are already have a presence and an influence in those communities? And how can we partner, be more collaborative, be more holistic, be more inclusive and diverse? And I think that's the future of this. The future of this is our industry becoming a little bit less of a monolith, both kind of in terms of race, gender, and socioeconomics, but also in terms of the movements, right? Animals, cats and dogs, everyone on this call knows this. They break down barriers. They break down every barrier that exists. And I think our ability to leverage that and truly tap into it is going to be what makes this sustainable and kind of changes the game once we do get back to normal.
For sure. Thank you, Kenny. And I'm curious, Sarah, from your perspective on the same type of thing from a shelter, like how do you think this is going to change how shelters rely on their community in the future? And where do you see the opportunities?
I was listening to a live LinkedIn earlier today between Gary Vee and Matt Higgins. And if you don't know who they are, they're both these entrepreneur business investors, and they're constantly pushing the envelope for more content and more engagement. And what they were talking about is the organizations, and they're speaking from a business standpoint, the organizations that are going to come out of this ahead are the organizations that have an offensive mindset instead of a defensive. And it's been really amazing to watch animal shelters across the country doing this, not only adapting and making adjustments, but really using this as a time to shine and be innovative and put things into place that they wanted to do but didn't have the time. You know, it's just been overwhelming to see that. So I think what I see is that shelters continue to work with their communities to house pets outside of the shelter, that foster programs continue to expand. You know, all over the country, in Kansas City and Santa Rosa and Austin and Pitt County in North Carolina, like all over the country, you're seeing shelters that are empty right now or nearly empty, where only the pets that truly need urgent medical care or behavioral resources, posing a threat to the danger to the public, those pets are housed at the shelter, and everything else is in the community. And that's truly, I think, the way that we're going to continue to see this movement go. And then the other thing that's coming is the technology to do all of these things virtually, to be more efficient. You know, there's not really a lot of money in making software and programs for shelters. And so it hasn't been anyone's focus, and now it's a requirement. And so to see these things coming, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of great technology and systems coming out of this.
Thanks, Sarah. I think you are spot on that. And I want to remind everyone that you can, if you have any questions, we're going to turn it over to audience questions now. So feel free to type any questions into the chat. If you want to hear anything specific from one of our panelists, feel free to mention their name, or just if you have a general question, feel free to ask it. We have a couple questions in the chat that I will get to. One, I'm going to give this one to Stacy. Somebody asked a question about if you're in a place where there are not actually shelters, and I assume they mean brick and mortar shelters. You know, some states, you know, not every town has a shelter. How can we think about engaging the community even if there isn't a physical shelter?
I think if you don't have a physical shelter, it's really, you know, you've got to have some animal advocates out there. So it's working with that first group of advocates to really spread the word throughout each of their individual networks so that you keep getting the word out. You know, I work in the Midwest, and one of our states is West Virginia, and we do have a few communities there, but their humane society is completely volunteer-based. They don't have a building, they don't have their animal shelter there, so they're just working through their local advocates. So I think, you know, if you have adopters who've adopted locally from you, if you have your fosters now who have done that, if you have just the people who are really the ones that are always at every animal event or on Facebook sharing every adoptable animal they have, reach out to those people and try to really leverage them in their community to become your own local action team. And they will probably know locally then how to best share that word. If there's a networking group for your local community, if it's working with some other human service agency that has a good spread of information across your community, to really just try to use those other networks and expand it out to include the animals too.
I'd like to add on to that. Sorry, Elise.
No, go ahead, please.
That brings up a really good point. Right now, we're kind of in a necessity is the mother of invention era where people can't come into the shelter. They can't, you know, meet dogs that they're interested in real life. And that has caused people to get creative and leverage tools that they may not have otherwise. For example, Austin Pets Alive has been doing meet and greets on Zoom, where people who are interested in dogs or cats to foster or adopt, they will set up a meeting with them and show them the animal, you know, face to face as best as they can, to limit that barrier of not being able to come in. And I think that that is something that we can you know, use in the future as well, to reduce the barriers that people have to coming in anytime, not just, you know, in this current quarantine era. And then there are so many organizations that are foster or volunteer based, and that's when you really have to activate those people that are caring for the animals to spread the word about them. Like Sarah was saying, so that's an opportunity to use digital tools, especially right now, but hopefully in the future as well, where I really encourage people to take advantage of Instagram stories, take advantage of the new channels out there that allow people to see the pets in the home, because that's what is going to encourage people to want to put them in their home, is if they can see them. So getting fosters on board with that, I think, is really important. And right now with such a surge in fosters, it's really important to make them feel supported so that they stick around and that they're enthusiastic about helping with the process. If they don't feel supported, they're not going to be feeling enthusiastic about helping promote the animals. But if they do, they're going to want to stick around and keep doing it.
Well said, April. So you're saying we should be making TikTok videos for our foster dogs?
Yeah, absolutely. And not everyone is comfortable with those technologies. I personally don't use TikTok, but I love Twitter, and I know some people are afraid of Twitter, but there are pros and cons of all of these. And if you're not comfortable yourself, chances are you have a volunteer who loves that platform. Ask them to help, ask them to support you right now by using their skills in that way. That's how I got involved with One Tail, their Twitter, and I think that kind of was a really good thing, because they didn't have somebody else who wanted to run it, and now there's somebody that is managing it. We have different people on different channels because different people have different skill sets, and so identify a volunteer, ask around. Somebody might want to do that for you, and it's a really great way to get the word out.
Well said. Thank you, April. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and get to one more question tonight. And this question is from someone who is struggling with field services, sort of assuming that everything is a liability. And to give an example, if they ask somebody who finds a lost animal to keep it, they're worried that something bad will happen, and they're worried about the liability being on animal services. And I think this is a common theme that a lot of times where we rely on our community more, and when we think more about using our community to do sometimes things that we do at shelters, there can be fear about liability or trust and those kinds of issues. So Sarah, I'm wondering if you can take this one. This person is specifically interested if you get the finder to fosters to sign an agreement that has a waiver. So if you could answer that specifically, but then just kind of speak to that trust and liability issue more generally from your perspective.
Yeah. So there's kind of two different ways that this happens for us. And keep in mind that people all over have been holding on to stray pets since stray pets existed. So this isn't a new idea. But one of the ways that this happens is folks show up at our door and they say, I found this pet. And we say, are you interested in keeping it? And we actually impound the pet, do vaccines, microchip, et cetera, and then make the finder a foster, like an official foster, in which case there's all of our regular agreements and waivers and whatnot. The other way is that people call us to report they found a pet, asking what they should do. We ask them if they're interested in holding on to it for us. We create a found report, and they aren't an official foster in the traditional sense, but they're holding on to the pet, and we're giving them resources and information. So in that case, those folks are the same as the people that were doing this beforehand. And we certainly aren't forcing folks to do this. We're giving them this as an option and asking if they can help us with it. I think you definitely come into some, like, I'm not a lawyer, but I think you definitely come into some issues if you're requiring people to do this. In more general terms, the more that we reduce barriers and we engage our community and we give them our trust, the more that they are stepping up and doing the right thing and being good fosters and being good pet owners. You know, we stopped doing home checks and reference checks and things years ago, and our return rates aren't higher, our bites in the community aren't higher. That people are trustworthy, they want to do the right thing, we just have to give them the opportunity to do that.
Well said. Thank you, Sarah. And I think that's an important theme for all of the type of work we're talking about in terms of, you know, just trusting people and giving them the opportunity to try it and letting the data and the statistics and what actually happens versus people's fear of what happens, letting that all play out and seeing that those fears often don't come to fruition. So I want to thank everyone so much for joining tonight. We are going to wrap up. I think we will have some resources available to you as follow-up for some of the things that we talked about on this call, and this is recorded, so you can come back to anything. And if we as the action team at Best Friends can be of any assistance to you as a shelter looking to engage your community, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll make sure that our contact email is in the chat as well. And thanks everyone for joining. You have a great night.